A woman passed away in her husband's arms. Then she whispered a few words that nobody expected. Melanie Pritchard, a nationally renowned pro-life activist and speaker, was given a 0% chance of survival after suffering an amniotic fluid embolism during labor. According to her doctors, what transpired after that, according to them, defied medical explanation. Midnight contraction sensations alerted Melanie Pritchard that she was in the early stages of labor. If everything goes according to plan, her baby's due date will be the 28th of July 2010. Melanie called her mother to let her know that her husband Doug was picking her up and transporting her to the hospital. Melanie's last memory is of receiving a phone call which marked the beginning of a 3-day dramatic struggle that came threatening close to taking her life and the life of her unborn child. She is a nationally famous Catholic defender of the unborn as well as a motivational speaker on modesty and chastity. Pritchard is 34 years old. Legendary has been defined as her work with pro-life and pro-family organizations in Arizona. She and her husband Doug arrived to the hospital in the wee hours of the morning. While it was still dark, everything seemed to be moving as it should have been. She asked for an epidural to help her cope with the pain. As the sun rose higher in the sky, contractions became more frequent and the doctor decided to induce labor. Then something unbelievable happened. "I'm on the verge of passing away." Melanie confided in her husband that she had the impression that something was amiss. She confided in Doug that she was on the verge of passing out. Despite the fact that her vital signs did not indicate that anything was wrong, the nurses adjusted her in attempt to find the source of her lightheadedness. Melanie suddenly collapsed to one side, her body convulsing mildly. Her heart rate and blood pressure dropped to lethally low levels. Doug was horrified to see that the heart rate of his unborn child had dropped drastically. Doug noticed Melanie's face and skin turning blue as though her heart had stopped beating and rushed to her aid. Melanie was rushed to the operating room by a team of doctors and nurses in an attempt to save the baby's life by the use of a cesarean section. Doug made a flurry of distraught phone calls to family and friends pleading with them to pray for Melanie and the child. Melanie's suffering was discovered by a friend of the Pritchard family, Mark Henry of Catholic Online, who spread the information to Catholic media groups, informing them that a young mother was in desperate need of heavenly intervention in her battle for her life. As a result of the plea, Immaculate Heart Radio, St. Joseph Communications and a number of other media outlets replied by putting out the prayer request via the internet or radio. News of Melanie's serious situation spread like wildfire over the internet with requests for prayer for Melanie. People were literally coming out of the woodwork to pray for her even if they didn't know who she was, says Carrie Holt, Melanie's sister. It was like a wave of support. People who had not stepped foot inside a church in years were prompted to enter and pray for the young mother in need. Melanie's book about her near-demise experience made its way to individuals who had never heard of Melanie before. In her native state of Arizona on that particular day, she was ranked in the top 10 of all Twitter users worldwide. There's absolutely no possibility of surviving. It is because to a successful cesarean operation that we have a healthy child with blonde hair and blue eyes in the world. Doug gave her the name Gabriella or Ella. Melanie had been clinically deceased for 10 minutes. At this point she was given cardiopulmonary resuscitation (CPR) and shocked 4 times with a defibrillator, before the medical team was able to revive her. Melanie had had an amniotic fluid embolism according to the physicians who informed Doug. It had been discovered that amniotic fluid had leaked from her womb and had migrated into her bloodstream, causing cardiac arrest. When it reached her heart during the cesarean operation, she experienced major internal bleeding, losing 5 liters of blood in the process. Because she had been without oxygen for such a lengthy period of time, the physicians were especially concerned about possible neurologic harm. Melanie's odds were stacked against her because of her catastrophic bleeding, 3 back-to-back emergency major operations, heart and lung failure and the possibility of brain damage. The physicians said that she would have a 0% chance of surviving. Goodbye, Doug was informed as he hugged the woman who had been his life's love. "I'm madly in love with you, I shall always be in love with you, Brady and Ella," son and newborn daughter are wonderful and they adore and rely on you completely. If you still have any fight in you, then fight. Meanwhile, believers in the power of prayer from all over the world descended on heaven in search of a miracle. What happened in the following 24 hours according to doctors defies scientific explanation. Melanie began to breathe on her own for the first time. All of a sudden she was gradually weaned off all medication. With the exception of those for pain, and then much to everyone's surprise she began to communicate with them. Only 48 hours after giving birth via cesarean section, Melanie sobbed as Doug assisted her in holding tiny Ella for the first time. Melanie was discharged from the hospital just 6 days after the tragedy began, much to everyone's surprise the most incredible of all miracles. The fact that she made it out of the hospital alive was an incredible achievement for a woman for whom physicians had previously declared there was little prospect of a positive outcome.